Deep beneath the bustling streets of Manhattan, 5 stories below the surface, lies a room unlike any other. There's no furniture, no art, no windows. There is only gold. 12,000 tons of it, stacked in shimmering bricks inside 122 separate cages. A treasure trove belonging to nations around the world. For decades, this was the safest room on the planet, the financial bedrock of modern civilization, all resting on one simple promise: the enduring power and stability of the United States dollar. But quietly, almost imperceptibly, the cages have started to empty. A quiet exodus is underway, a heist not of force, but of foresight. And it's not just happening here. In London, in Zurich, in vaults across the globe, the same silent withdrawal is taking place. The world's most powerful players, nations, central banks, and billionaires, are pulling their gold out of the system. They're taking it home. And the question no one in power wants to answer is, why? To understand this story, we have to go back. Not to last year, or even the last decade, but to a grand hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, in the summer of 1944. The world was in flames, cities lay in ruins. The leaders of the Allied nations knew that to rebuild, they needed a new financial system built from the ashes. At its center was the US dollar, but the dollar itself was anchored to something real, something tangible: gold. Every dollar printed was a claim check for a specific amount of gold stored in American vaults. Any country could, at any time, exchange its dollars for physical gold at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. It was a gentleman's agreement on a global scale, a promise of stability in a world that had known only chaos. And for a while, it worked. The world rebuilt, economies boomed. American power, backed by gold, was absolute. But promises, even those made between nations, can be broken. By the late 1960s, America was fighting a costly war in Vietnam and funding an ambitious social agenda at home. The printing presses were running hot. The world was flooded with dollars, and other countries, particularly France, began to get nervous. They looked at their pile of paper dollars, then at America's dwindling pile of gold, and they did the math. French President Charles de Gaulle began sending warships, not to fight, but to collect. He was calling America's bluff, trading his dollars for gold, and sailing it back to Paris. Other nations followed. The drain on Fort Knox became a torrent. Then, on a quiet Sunday evening, August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon appeared on national television. He spoke of speculators and unfair exchange rates, but the message was simple, and its consequences were tectonic. America was unilaterally severing the dollar's final link to gold. The gold window was closed, forever. In that moment, the entire global financial system was changed. The dollar, and by extension all major currencies, became fiat money, backed by nothing but faith in the government that issues it. It was a breathtaking gamble. A new era of finance had begun. For 50 years that faith largely held. The world kept using dollars. It was the language of oil, of trade, of international finance. But faith is a fragile thing, and in the quiet corridors of power in Moscow and Beijing, the memory of 1971 never faded. They saw it not as a necessity, but as a betrayal. A demonstration that when push came to shove, America would always choose its own interests. They watched as the U.S. wielded the dollar not just as a currency, but as a weapon, imposing sanctions, freezing assets, and cutting entire nations off from the global financial system. To them, the dollar wasn't a stable anchor. It was a leash, and they began to quietly, methodically, look for a way to break it. The plan was simple, almost primitive. It was a return to the vault. Starting in the mid-2000s, the central banks of China and Russia began buying gold. At first, it was a trickle. A few tons here, a few tons there. But then the pace quickened. After the 2008 financial crisis, As the U.S. Federal Reserve began printing trillions of dollars in quantitative easing, the buying turned into a flood. Russia, under Vladimir Putin, made it a national strategic priority. While the world watched his military maneuvers, his real long-term play was happening underground, in the silent gleaming vaults of the Kremlin. He understood that true sovereignty didn't just come from tanks and missiles. It came from economic independence. Every single ounce of gold Russia bought was an ounce freed from the influence of the dollar. China's strategy was even more ambitious. It became the world's largest producer of gold and simultaneously the world's largest importer. It encouraged its own citizens to buy gold, creating a massive domestic demand. While official numbers were kept deliberately opaque, analysts tracking shipments and mining data estimated that China was accumulating a hoard that could rival, or even surpass, America's. This wasn't just saving for a rainy day. This was a coordinated, multi-decade strategy to de-dollarize. They were building an alternative financial system, brick by golden brick, right under the nose of the West. They were creating a world where American sanctions would mean nothing, because they would no longer need American dollars to trade. Then came the catalysts, the events that turned this slow-moving strategy into a frantic global sprint. In 2022, following the invasion of Ukraine, the United States and its allies did something unprecedented. They froze the Russian central bank's dollar reserves, hundreds of billions of dollars, made inaccessible with the flip of a switch. For the financial world, it was a nuclear option. It sent a shockwave through every central bank on the planet. The message was clear. Your dollar reserves are not your own. They are a privilege granted by Washington that can be revoked at any time. Suddenly, Putin's obsession with gold didn't look paranoid. It looked prescient. For countries like China, India, Brazil, and Saudi Arabia, the lesson was terrifying. Their life savings were being held in someone else's bank, and the banker had just proven they were willing to lock the doors. The buying frenzy began. In 2022, central banks bought more gold than in any year since the 1960s. The following year, they did it again. Poland secretly airlifted 100 tons of gold from London back to Warsaw. Hungary did the same. Turkey, India, Singapore, the list went on. These weren't rogue states. They were major economic players, all making the same calculated decision. They were losing faith. Trust in the long-term stability of the American-led order was evaporating. And it wasn't just geopolitics. It was the math. America's national debt was spiraling past $34 trillion. The Federal Reserve, once seen as an unshakable institution, was now being openly criticized by political leaders. To the rest of the world, this looked like a nation actively devaluing its own currency. While governments were moving mountains of gold in secret, a parallel movement was taking hold on the surface. Individual investors, from hedge fund billionaires to ordinary people, started to feel the same unease. They watched the price of groceries, gas, and housing skyrocket. They were told inflation was transitory, then watched it become entrenched in their daily lives. They saw their savings, sitting in a bank account, losing purchasing power every single day. The money they had worked their entire lives to earn was melting away like an ice cube on a summer sidewalk. And so they too began their own return to the vault. They bought gold coins, small gold bars, and shares in gold-backed funds. It wasn't about getting rich quick. It was a defensive move. Gold, they reasoned, couldn't be printed by a central bank. It had no CEO, no board of directors. It couldn't be devalued by a politician's tweet. Its value was inherent, recognized across cultures and millennia. It was an insurance policy against chaos. In an age of digital money and complex derivatives, they were turning back to the oldest, most trusted form of wealth on Earth. It was a quiet rebellion against a system they felt was failing them. The great irony is that for 50 years, the world's most brilliant economic minds dismissed gold. They built a sophisticated global financial system of immense complexity, all based on computer algorithms, debt, and ultimately trust. But what we are witnessing now is the slow, painful rediscovery of a timeless truth. When trust breaks down, all that's left is what you can hold in your hand. The nations and individuals buying gold today aren't speculators. They are hedging against a future they see more clearly than others. A future where the promises of governments may not be enough. A future where the dollar is no longer king. The emptied cages in the New York Fed are a symbol. The cargo planes flying east in the dead of night, filled with bullion, are a warning. We are living through a fundamental rewiring of the global order. A silent revolution measured not in headlines, but in ounces. The shift is happening not with a bang, but with the quiet, heavy thud of a gold bar being stacked in a vault. And as the dust settles on this new era, the world may find that power no longer resides with those who can print the money, but with those who were wise enough to hold the gold. The final act of this story has not yet been written, but the stage is set, and the world is holding its breath, waiting to see what happens when the 50-year gamble on faith finally runs out. Thanks for watching. If you found this look into the world of gold and global finance fascinating, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives.